Hello and welcome to my channel. In this tutorial, we're going to discuss Python tuple data structure. So what is a Python tuple? A Python tuple is a sequence data type that allows us to combine several items in one comma-separated data instance. A tuple can contain elements of the same or different data types, and it is immutable, which means that we cannot alter the size and content of a tuple object in Python after it is created. Creating a tuple in Python is very simple. You need to put all the items separated by commas into parentheses. Keep in mind that you can put different data types together: integers, floats, booleans, and even other tuples. Let's take a look at a few examples. First, let's create a tuple with string elements. Then let's create a tuple with numerical elements. Let's also create a tuple with elements of different data types. In the examples above, each item in a tuple only contained one value. What if we wanted to store two values per item? Python tuples allow us to do that too. For example, you would like to make a tuple of products and their prices. Your data is the following. You have a price of an apple, which is $1, and a price of a banana, which is 70 cents. In order to add two or more values per item in a tuple, we need to put them in parentheses and separate with commas. It will look like having a tuple inside of a tuple, which is a nested tuple. An important and very useful property of a Python tuple is that it's an index sequence, meaning that for a tuple with n elements, the first element will have an index equal to 0, second element index equal to 1, and all the way to n minus 1 to the last element in the tuple. Now let's take a look how we can access element from a tuple using its index. So here we have a tuple with 4 elements, and they are strings apple, banana, orange, and pineapple. Now we would like to print out the first element from the tuple. We know from before that it has two indexes: 0 if we start counting from the beginning of the tuple, and -4 if we start counting from the end of the tuple. So we can try both and see if the output will be the same. Now let's run the code and see what we get. As you can see from the output, both ways print out the first element of a tuple, which is apple. Next, let's see how we can find an element in a tuple. So let's continue working with the existing tuple that we have. Now, we would like to find the index of banana element. By just looking at the tuple, we can already see that banana element has index 1 since it's the second element in the zero index tuple. Now, how we can do this programmatically? This can be simply done using the index method that takes some value as a parameter and finds its index in a Python tuple. So first, let's create a variable called element and assign the item that we would like to look up to find its index in the tuple. So in our case, it will be banana as a string. Next, let's create a new variable, which will be element index, which will store the index of the banana element. And using the index method, let's find the index of banana element in the tuple. And finally print out the index of the element. Now let's run the code and see what we get. As you can see, we've correctly identified that the index of the banana element is 1. In the section before, we showed how you can access an element from a Python tuple using its exact index. In this section, we will show what to do when you want to access a range of elements, for example, first two or last two. Recall that for retrieving elements from a tuple using an index, we placed it in square brackets. Slicing is using the same approach, but instead of passing a single index value, we will pass a range. A range in Python is passed using the following syntax. So first we will have the reference to our original tuple, which is my tuple. And then the range is placed with two values, which are the from and to. So in my case, I just placed a few placeholders, which are going to be changed, and we're going to use specific indexes when we want to access a specific range from a tuple. So first, let's take a look at slicing without specifying from and to indexes. So if you don't put any index into from and to, by default, Python will take the entire tuple. So let's look at an example with just printing out our full tuple and printing out a range without specifying from and to values. As you can see, we got two identical outputs, and the full tuple was printed out twice. You can also slice a tuple with just specifying the from index, and what it will do is it will take the elements from the index you specified until the end of the tuple. For example, let's say you would like to print out the last two elements in the tuple. Remember that you can use both the index and the reverse index. As we can see, in both cases, we printed out the last two elements of the tuple. You can also slice a tuple with just specifying the to index. And what it will do is it will take the elements from the beginning of the tuple until the element at the index you specified minus 1. For example, you would like to print out the first two elements of the tuple. Remember that you can use both the index and the reverse index. As we can see, in both cases, we printed out the first two elements of the tuple. Notice here that we specified our to index as 2. The way tuple slicing works in Python is that it goes through elements until the specified to index, in our case index 2 or minus 2, and it includes all elements up to that index, but not including the element under the to index. In this tutorial, we focused on an introductory walkthrough of a Python tuple data structure and its functionality, which is important to learn as tuples are used in many areas of programming and in machine learning. Feel free to leave comments below if you have any questions or suggestions, like and share the video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for more of my Python programming tutorials.